I think that the culture of believing that the founders got everything right prevents us from seeing those flaws. We make excuses for them. Here, 250 years into our history, in a country that founders wouldn't recognize, bearing aspirations and ideals that I don't think the founders shared, I don't believe that the intentions of the founders should continue to bind us.
What's going on today is not helpful. It's not healthy. We need to rekindle some kind of civic values. As flawed as these individuals were, I think we need something that binds us, that unites us, and these are great models in that way for us to emulate.
This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. Hi, everybody. Go back 2.5 centuries, and the men who drove the American Revolution, men like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and John Adams and all the rest, the men we call the Founding Fathers, sometimes just the founders, they never heard the term culture war. But now, just as we're celebrating the nation's 250th birthday, these men stand most prominently at the heart of a new culture war battle. They have been named in a report just released by the Trump administration that is accusing the National Museum of American History of being too woke. The administration is arguing that the museum, which is part of the Smithsonian Institution, does not do enough to honor the founders, and by omission is actually dishonoring them. The museum leadership disputes that. Other critics say the report itself is methodologically flawed and biased. The White House pushes back, no, it's not. So yes, we're in the middle of a classic culture war face-off. But while the Smithsonian waits to see if the White House is going to take some action against the museum, we are not going to debate what's happening there in this episode. Instead, because there does appear to be some legitimate disagreement in general around how to honor the men who gave us the Declaration of Independence and victory over Britain and the Constitution, we're going to look directly at that question about the men and their work. Here's what we're asking in this debate, and we're bringing in two debaters to take opposite sides. Is it time to stop idolizing the founders? So let's meet our debaters. Answering yes to that question, it's time to stop idolizing. I want to welcome Osita Nwanevu, who is a contributing editor at The New Republic, a columnist at The Guardian, author of The Right of the People, Democracy, and the Case for a New American Founding. Osita, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on Open to Debate.
Thank you so much.
Could you tell us in one sentence, and I just want it to be one sentence so we don't launch the debate, because I'm sure it's going to be germane to your arguments. Your book calls for a new American founding. In that one sentence, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is that taking after, among others, the historian Eric Foner, who argues that the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments of the Constitution after Reconstruction amounted to a second founding, I do believe we have had in this country's history moments where we fundamentally rework our institutions, and I'm arguing in the book that given the political and economic challenges we face, we're due for another one.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about your point of view on that as we have the discussion. But that discussion also includes Helena Rosenblatt, a historian, a professor of history, French, and political science at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, author of The Lost History of Liberalism from Ancient Rome to the 21st Century. Helena, welcome to the program. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And you were born in Sweden. Now you're an American. I'm just interested, having come from Sweden, grown up in Sweden, when did the founding fathers of the United States kind of begin to dazzle you?
Well, my father was a diplomat. He was stationed in Beirut, Lebanon, and there I went to the American Community School. And as a young girl, I learned about the founding fathers. I probably heard little stories about George Washington, chopping down the cherry tree and not lying about it, and Benjamin Franklin. We had these little books. I know those were mythologized, but they really kindled my love for history and my love for this country and made me very curious about the founding fathers.
All right. Excellent background to know as we go into this conversation and this debate. And let's start the debate with our opening statements. We want each of you to take 4 minutes or up to 4 minutes to explain why you're taking the position you are. Osita, you're up first. You're arguing, yes, it's time to stop idolizing the founding fathers. Please tell us why.
Sure thing. So as I think is generally good practice in debates like this, I should talk a little bit about how I'm interpreting the resolution. In arguing that we should stop idolizing the founders, I'm not here to argue that we should no longer consider them important figures, or for a wholesale rejection of everything they did and said. What I am arguing is that we should leave behind our culture of founder veneration and worship. Here, 250 years into our history, in a country that founders wouldn't recognize, facing problems the founders could not have imagined, and bearing aspirations and ideals that I don't think the founders shared. I don't believe that the intentions of the founders should continue to bind us. We should be less interested in what the founders had as expectations for us than whether our institutions in our country measures up to our expectations here and now. And there are basically three things I'd like to say in support of this point. The first is that I don't think the founders actually wanted us to revere them in the ways that we've come to revere them. Jefferson, I think, is most famous for having this attitude, writes famously to Madison in 1789 that he doesn't believe the constitutions can justly last more than 19 years or so. After that, it would be the dead hand of one generation extending itself over the generations unjustly. And he's obsessed with this question over the course of his life, actually. So in 1816, for instance, he writes to Samuel Kercheval, a lawyer and historian in Virginia, on Virginia's constitution, the following. Some men look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched. They ascribe to the men of the preceding age a wisdom more than human and suppose what they did to be beyond amendment. We might as well require, he goes on to write, a man to still wear the coat which fitted him as a boy, as civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors. Now, Jefferson's a little bit of a radical in this respect, but the other founders said very similar things. Madison, Federalist 14. Is it not the glory of the people of America that while they've paid a decent regard to the opinions of former times and other nations, they have not suffered a blind veneration for antiquity, for custom, or for names, to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense, the knowledge of their own situation, and the lessons of their own experience. And finally, you have George Washington writing to his nephew, Bushrod, in 1787, just a couple of months after the convention in Philadelphia. I think the people, for it is with them to judge, can, as they will have the advantage of experience on their side, decide with as much propriety on the alterations and amendments which are as necessary as ourselves. I do not think that we are more inspired, have more wisdom, or possess more virtue than those who will come after us. And the irony of our culture of founder worship, to my mind, is it implies that Washington didn't know what he was talking about. We do talk about the founders as though they were more inspired, more wise, and more virtuous than the Americans who came after them, and certainly more than the American people today. By contrast, what I'm here to argue today, fundamentally, is that Washington and Madison and Jefferson, in their humility, in their critical distance from themselves, and their optimism about what Americans will learn from experience, were right. Two other points I want to make briefly. We have other heroes. Certainly, we've had our pick of transformative presidents from Lincoln on. I think both Roosevelts, Lyndon Johnson, Reagan for better or for worse. People like Charles Sumner, Thaddeus Stevens, people like Samuel Gompers, Mother Jones. All kinds of characters in our pantheon of potential heroes that we don't talk about enough because I think we've lionized the founders so much. And the last point I want to make is that I don't think we should believe in the founders more than we believe in ourselves. Over the course of writing the book I just published, I was very, very struck by the vision of America laid out by Walt Whitman, where he lays out this vision of the country as a place where human agency would really be honored and human beings would flourish more than any other country that existed before. Whitman believed that the people to lionize in America were the American people themselves, that there was beauty and virtue and wisdom in ordinary folks. I think that's a kind of vision of America that we can all subscribe to, and I don't think we need the founders in order to have that kind of inspiration guide us.
Thank you very much, Osita. Helena, you're taking the opposite side. You believe that it is not time to stop idolizing the founders. Your 4 minutes begin now.
Thank you. Thank you very much I really appreciate this kind of debate, especially given the culture wars. It's really nice to have this sort of civil debate. And I agree with at least some of what Osita just said. But I think, and I also don't think that I worship the Founding Fathers, or we should worship the Founding Fathers. We don't make a religion out of the Constitution or out of the Founding Fathers. But I do admire them. I do respect them. I am very grateful for them. I am grateful for them having produced this amazing documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that have lasted over 200 years. When you look at, I'm a European historian and have written a lot about and thought a lot about France. And France had, some say 17 constitutions. and a lot of revolutions, and a lot of disorder and chaos and bad stuff. And we have not here in this country. I admire the Founding Fathers for their courage, for believing that a republic is possible in a large state. This was not believed at the time. People thought that America would fail, that republics were not possible. They were incredibly courageous. They were brave. They gave us language that still resonates. Natural rights and equality. They gave us the beautiful words, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. We, not a king, not God, but we. A perfect union, and that's beautiful as well. And I think that can continue to inspire us. Now, there's something I also want to say that is kind of a little bit personal, but also psychologists, I think, agree that we need stories. We need people whom we can admire. And I find that what's going on today is not helpful. It's not healthy. I disagree with this phrase that we should stop idolizing the Founding Fathers, because I think that they're being criticized unfairly over and over again. I see it with my own students. People need stories. They need, as flawed as these individuals were, I think we need something that binds us, that unites us, and these are great models in that way for us to emulate.
Thank you very much, Helena. So I just want to read back my notes on what I think I've heard each of you saying in your opening statements. I think we recognize that there's a baseline traditional view that has been dominant for decades of the Founding Fathers as being a unique set of individuals. They're the ones in the statues. They're the ones we put in marble looking off into the distance, and they have been accorded a special status, not to the level of idolizing. I don't think you've already made it clear, Helena, you're not arguing to idolize, and we don't mean that word to mean to indicate that there's a religious worship in any sense. We mean it to say that they do have this special status, haven't enjoyed it for some time. And as you indicate, that's being somewhat challenged in certain circles now. So with that as the baseline, Osita is parting with that. He says their unique status has been somewhat oversold, that they have been over-lionized, absolutely acknowledges that they made an important contribution, but not to such a degree that they still merit the kind of civic veneration that we're talking about as these dazzling and noble figures. He wants to keep some distance. He wants to acknowledge that their thinking, important at the time, has not kept pace with the evolution of the U.S. as a nation and as an experiment. In that regard, he's written about wanting to revisit the Constitution, not just through the amendment process, but in a much more profound way for a major overhaul. And finally, in general, he doesn't think that we need to look to a class of heroes to validate who we are. We don't need saints to kickstart the story of our democracy, especially as he doesn't think that this group actually put an enormous amount of faith in democracy as we understand it and aspire to it today. Helena, I hear you taking a reverse position. You do say that these men do merit a unique form of reverence. Again, not worship and not idolization, but that they do stand out. So we're not holding you to that term, that they deserve a distinct and unique respect. You're concerned that you think that there's a trend going in an opposite direction, that there is a move to take them down a peg. You think they are relevant today because their ideas continue to be relevant when it comes to grappling with the big questions, that they were capable of unique wisdom and courage. And you consider them sort of incredible. So, and you also make the point at the end of your closing, in disagreement with Osita, that there is value to having heroes, to recognizing and admiring greatness, and you feel that that was embodied in these individuals, and to demote them leads to some, kind of outcome that you're very much not happy with. So I think that there's a lot of disagreement there, but nobody is you're neither saying that they were gods on one side, nor are you saying that they were depraved on the other. We're talking about where to place them on the spectrum, while acknowledging that they made contributions, but how do we rate those contributions now? So Osita, I want to take this to you first, where Helena is arguing that, yes, they were flawed. And of course, very often this conversation revolves around the fact that they were, many of them were slave owners, which in the light of history, it looks like a very, very serious flaw. She also says they were one of a kind, and that their wisdom and insight set us on a course that still is responsible for very, very successful outcomes of various sorts today, that they are different, they are special. And can you take that on?
Sure thing. So look, I mean, I think that the founding of the United States was an extraordinary thing in world history. I think that it was a tremendous achievement. I'm not somebody, I'm on the left, but I part ways with some people on the left who don't think that there was anything especially promising in the American example and what happened in the American Revolution. I think that there was. But I also think that really taking the revolution seriously, really taking the founders seriously, means taking them seriously as political theorists, political actors, and not as a kind of canon of saints, which I do think that we have a culture of kind of trying to make them. There's one way this debate could play out, which is, as you described, we talk about the founders as slave owners, we talk about the founders as people who participated in the genocide of Native Americans, we can talk about the founders as people who didn't believe in the equality of women. I think that these things are true, but they've never really been a focus of my writing and thinking about the founders for a couple of reasons. One is that I don't think that argument persuades very many more people. If you've not been persuaded here in 2026 that Thomas Jefferson was not a moral exemplar because he owned slaves, there's nothing else you can say on that subject that's going to persuade and convert somebody at this point. That arguments have been heard. They're part of our culture. They're trivial at this point, or at least kind of common. But again, I'm somebody who likes to extract what I can from history, and I'm somebody who likes to think about, because nobody has the attitudes progressive has today across history, what nonetheless we can learn. And I think, again, as I say in the opening, ironically, one of the things that we can learn from the founders is that future generations and successive generations of Americans can build upon the experience of their forefathers and utilize their experience with the institution they create to create new ones. And that actually, the American people have the right to fundamentally rework their institutions if they deem that necessary. That's what the founders did in the act of the revolution. They broke from a set of institutions that they thought were no longer working, established in the Declaration that it is the right of all people across all time to evaluate their systems on the basis of their principles and break from them. And ironically, we talk about the founders in a way that I think refuses to take that action seriously. We tell ourselves that there was one justified revolution in our history, one justified critical attitude toward pre-existing institutions, and everything that's followed in America exists only to reify that initial founding. I don't think that's the right attitude to have. I think there were moments where I'm much more skeptical about the durability and this stability of the Constitution they founded than Helena seems to be.
Let me break. I just want to break in because you made a number of good points now, and I just want to give Helena a chance to respond to some of it. Helena, what would be your first response to what you're hearing from Osita?
I think there's a little bit of contradiction in what Osita just said, because on the one hand, we should move beyond them. On the other hand, they themselves said that the Constitution, might need amending. I mean, not might, but definitely needs, and that we shouldn't worship the Constitution as it was. I have studied the Enlightenment in America and the Enlightenment in France very carefully, and thinkers like them believed in progress, believed that society was going to change over time. They were quite idealistic. They believed that things were going to get better, more people were going to become educated, and over time, most likely, the Constitution would have to be amended to account for that. Now, heroes, on the question of heroes, we can have many heroes. There's no reason that we can't have many heroes. But let's not forget the founding fathers, and demote them in this way. I don't think it serves a purpose. Yes, maybe we need to change.
Do you feel it's a demotion that we're talking about is happening?
Yeah, I do. I do. It's a motion that worries me also. I think in this day, it's not healthy. It's not healthy. Our Constitution is under attack. And I think it's maybe our only tool to save our liberal democracy. And so to start talking about changing it right now, I just don't agree with. And one more thing I want to say. Demoting them and the Constitution right now, I think, is actually dangerous, given that our liberal democracy is under attack, and this may be the only thing that can save us in this terrible moment that we're living through. And the other thing I want to say is there is no reason to think that. I think that in saying let's stop idolizing the founding fathers, we can say that by looking at them this way from our perspective today, there's a fear that we're idolizing ourselves. We're standing in judgment from our perspective with our values today. And what are people going to say about us? How are you sure that writing a new constitution, a new founding, how it's going to be any better than what has survived for over 200 years?
Well, look, I mean, I certainly hope that 200 years from now, given that I fully expect Americans in the future, if we're still lucky enough to be around, will know more than we do, have studied political issues more than we have had debates about what their values ought to be. I fully expect that they'll come to different conclusions about the nature of government and what government should look like than we might have now. And I think that they should have the right, 200 years from now, or whenever it happens to be, to work their institutions on that basis. That's, I think, the founders' perspective. They really believed in the possibility of learning from experience, as you say, Helena, to iterate, to take what's you've been given, to work with it for some time, have debates, have arguments, and then maybe come to a different set of conclusions. I think the problem now is that we have a constitution that is one of the hardest in the world to amend. It hasn't kicked around so long purely because it was perfect and they got everything right, but it's actually very, very structurally difficult to make the kinds of amendments that the founders imagined. There'll be people who talk about us never having the ability to amend the Constitution again. And that's despite the fact that I think we do have very, very deep structural flaws that are worth addressing, that are frustrating our ability to make policies and that are deranging our politics. And I think that the culture of believing that the founders got everything right, or got most things right in 1787, prevents us from seeing those flaws. We make excuses for them.
So that is what you say is fundamentally the problem with the kind of, again, I'm going to use the term hero worship, knowing that that's not a term that Helena is embracing, but we all know what I mean by that. That status. You say that the harm in that is that it causes us to avoid seriously questioning some of the tenets of the founding of our system.
I think that's right. I've gone on tour for this book for the better part of a year now. And, every so often I'll ask people who criticize the argument, okay, well, what do you think is wrong with the Constitution? Is there anything that you can point to as part of the basic design of this document that they think might be amended, might be changed, might be fundamentally altered, given that we now have more than 2 centuries of experience with it? We've seen constitutions around the world develop, Republican governments around the world. We have political science as a discipline that did not exist in 1787. We approach political questions with more rigor and empiricism than the founders did. Is there anything that you think, given all that, we should fundamentally alter this document on the basis of, now that we've had it for more than 2 centuries? And so let me say no.
Let me bring then to Helena the objection you have to the elevation of this group of founders from 250 years ago, is that is preventing the United States as a culture, as a body politic, from taking a long, hard look at how it's operating now. That gets in the way of serious, profound amendment of the Constitution.
I don't understand why, given the fact that it's so hard to make amendments, that it's going to be any easier to totally rehaul the Constitution. And I admire your optimism that we're getting better, political science is getting better, that we know more, and so we would write a better Constitution today. But I don't really see any evidence of that at all. I see polarization, I see anger. I see despondence. I see students. I think that their civic investments is going down. They're cynical, and that's why I think we need to rekindle some kind of civic values, and we can start with these, I agree, flawed individuals, but who wrote something beautiful. We can discuss it. I teach intellectual history. We read the great thinkers. I'm a believer in reading these great thinkers, who tend to be dead white men, and that's a shame. But
are you saying, Helena, that they bequeath to kind of a system that has a kind of inherent stability? The slowness of change that Osita has an issue with, that inherent stability that they bequeathed us in their thinking and in the document that they constructed is actually a good thing.
Yes, I do think so. I think, again, that they have created stability and order for many, many years.
Well, I mean, I think that, it's up to the viewer. Do people watching and listening to this think that we live in a stable country today? Does it seem like the Constitution is doing its job of pulling Americans together and creating a system by which we might govern ourselves and solve our policy problems efficiently and sensibly? I think it's not. I think the provisions of the Constitution are doing a whole lot to exacerbate polarization, the kinds of inequities it creates within the public, the power it gives some Americans over others. These are things that I think cleave us apart. But, going back to something that you said at the outset, John, in framing this conversation, we've had these references to the dead white men kind of discourse. Look, if the founders, as much as they were wrong and wicked, in my perspective, in owning slaves and doing things to massacre Native Americans and not believe women were equal, if they, despite all that, had created a system of governance I think was still working for us here in 2026, I would not be arguing that we should overturn it. I'm sure that the people who invented the pencil and the wheel had very unwoke opinions by today's standards. I wouldn't say that's a reason to get rid of the pencil and the wheel. The argument I'm making is that the institutions that we've been given are not, in fact, working to our ends and our interests. And we have a culture, I do believe, that holds them to such high regard that we think that the products of their wisdom back more than 2 centuries ago should still bind us in ways that I think are kind of crazy. And what I'm hacking away at is that, again, not this idea that the founders were not intelligent people and that they did not maybe do the best they could. Maybe it was the best constitution we could have had in 1787. But we are a different country now with different concerns and different values, and different aspirations. And I think we should have institutions to match. I don't think it'll happen tomorrow. Helena is very, very correct that what I'm talking about is a very, very ambitious vision for where this country ought to go. But I do think we should have a movement to take us in a direction, yes, eventually, of having a new constitution. It might take 100 years, it might last beyond my lifetime. But unless we have a more critical distance from the founders, we're never going to set ourselves on that path. And I think we're going to continue to see our politics and our policymaking apparatuses decay.
I just want to say that this cynicism that I encounter among young people, I don't agree that they are idolizing the founding fathers or that they think that the Constitution is perfect. Contrary. And I think that, demoting it, as we're saying, and finding just fault and not recognizing the good, but only focusing on the bad. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that in my students. It is not helpful. Why don't we start with some civic education? Why do you think that necessarily more, and this is controversial, I'm saying this also so that we can debate it. Why do you think that more democracy necessarily is so much better?
What a great question, because it was a question I was holding in reserve for later on. So let's go to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have 300 pages worth on that question. You can buy it for $19.99 on Amazon.
I've read it. It's great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think some of these questions are kind of existential and fundamental questions about what we believe about human life. I believe in democracy because I believe we're entitled to a measure of agency over the conditions that shape our lives. That it's wrong for us to live under the thrall of people who just happen to be more wealthy, happen to be more powerful than us. And that society degrades when we don't have the ability to, yes, maybe we'll make mistakes, maybe we'll make the wrong decisions time after time. But there's something wrong with not having the opportunity to make our own decisions for ourselves and to learn from our mistakes and to pull ourselves forward through the process of democratic politics. I think that there are balances that have to be struck. If you're somebody who believes in liberalism and you believe that there are certain things we ought to protect as a matter of individual rights, and you talk about creating a court system that protects those rights and so on. But my point is, it's a good question because I think, Helena, that we are accustomed in this country to not asking that question. It's a question we owe ourselves the opportunity to ask. Instead, I think we have a culture where we ask ourselves not what human beings are entitled to, but what the founders wanted. And as long as we ask that question, instead of the more fundamental question of what is good in society, what the good is, what we're entitled to, we're going
you don't feel that the founders had that insight.
Oh, I think they did. And I think that's one of the things that we've lost in trying to elevate them to this kind of sainthood. Again, the Declaration of Independence is an extraordinary document, a revolutionary document that proceeds from a principle or a set of principles about what human life is for to a course of action that tries to justify. That impulse that the founders had has been lost in a culture that says that whenever we have a fundamental political question in this country, we don't ask ourselves philosophically, what would a good society look like, or what might our institutions need to do for us as human beings? We ask ourselves, well, what did the founders think about this? What would the founders have wanted? Let's go back at the Supreme Court and sort of do this exegesis of letters to figure out what the policy should be. That's the kind of attitude that I'm arguing that we should challenge, partially because I think the founders demonstrated what is possible when you ask yourselves more fundamental questions of political philosophy, of ethics. And I think we have a culture of idolizing founders that actually takes us away from that, ironically.
Well, again, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's ridiculous. I respectfully say that it's ridiculous to try to get immediate answers from the founding fathers to problems of today. What would the founding fathers say about artificial intelligence? Should we give them rights? This is actually being discussed right now. Yeah. Should bots have rights? And they would be incapable. I don't think they could ever have imagined such a thing. But you mentioned, I'm not trying to worship them again, but I'm saying that studying them, I think you mentioned something about intentions and looking at what they intended. And sometimes it sounds like you really think that there was something beautiful about what they intended, but that now we've moved beyond it. And I think that studying them with exercising our critical judgment, not dismissing them, not idolizing them, but studying them with respect and admiration for what they did, we can see what's good and what's bad. Where can we learn from them? Where can we not learn from them?
Do you feel, Helena, that they embodied democratic impulses and convictions in the way that Osita is talking about?
Okay, so that gives me a chance to talk about, Osita talks about democracy. I would talk about liberal democracy. I've written a book on the history of liberalism, and I think in this country we often confound the two. Now, democracy, if you go back to ancient Greece, it means direct democracy, right? Every citizen votes for legislation, and obviously they didn't have representative democracy yet. And today we have something we call liberal democracy. Democracy, the founding fathers thought, needs to be contained. We need protections for individuals, for groups. We need direct democracy is not a good thing. Do we believe that crowds from the street should decide, legislate? No. We need people with some experience. We need to elect experience who can then represent the people in a liberal democracy. And democracy. And so we have to be careful about what we mean by democracy. In Tocqueville, for example, he uses it, I think, 6 or 7 times in different ways. So So let's be careful. Let's be clear about what we mean about democracy and understand that it needs to be contained in some way. I don't know if you agree with that, but I certainly do. Populism. We have rulers in all over the world right now who call themselves Democrats, who are elected by the people directly, and then dismantle all the protections that we hold so dear.
Okay. I just want to let Osita respond because you made a number of points there.
I think I'd have a little bit more confidence in the wisdom of crowds than maybe she does. I mean, I think that there's something to the idea of collective knowledge, collective intelligence. There's a political theorist, Helena, who I don't fully agree with, but who's written a couple of books on that question recently, that there's something to putting a question to a large group of people that might give us more insight than giving it to a kind of expert. But I do agree with the general principle of, if we believe in individual rights, there's certainly democratic outcomes that can contravene them. And I think there should be institutions that deal with that. The question is, do the institutions we actually have in the United States do that especially well and do that in the ideal way? Is there something to the contrary, a little bit disturbing about having a Supreme Court that has that function where people serve for life and you have to turn on CNN whenever somebody takes a fall to see whether or not we're going to have a fundamentally different policy on climate change or abortion rights or something like that. I think that's kind of crazy. It's not something you see in other liberal democracies around the world. So we should be permitted to ask these kinds of questions and to, again, have a kind of critical distance from the institutions that we've inherited.
It seems you are agreeing that the founders were suspicious, were concerned about pure democracy, that there's no disagreement about that. Yeah. Do you think that was a wise position on their part, Osita?
Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, it's important to sort of disaggregate what they said on many of these questions. I mean, I have a lot of fun telling people when it comes to critiquing the Senate, for instance, that Madison thought that equal representation in the Senate was a terrible idea and said so. That the convention can barely bring himself to defend it in the Federalist Papers because he thought that it would create these distortions in policymaking that would lead to minority rule in Congress. I think we've seen those predictions bear out. So even as skeptical as the founders were of democracy, they did come to some compromises within the construction of our present system that even people like Madison and Hamilton disagreed with. And so that's something to take seriously. But on the whole, yes, they were rather skeptical of the idea that we should have popular rule. I talk in the book about the particular things they were concerned about in the lead up to the convention and the economic policies they were concerned about and the wanting to thwart. But, I think, there's this question that we always ask ourselves, is the United States a republic or a democracy? I think it's a misleading and oversimplified question in many respects. And what I'm arguing for is a kind of democratic republic. Republican governance is about fundamentally, again, this is very, very condensed, making sure that there is not accretions of power in one particular place. It might be an all-powerful king. It might be a kind of unruly mass public that doesn't know what it's doing. You need stable institutions, the rule of law, good rules for governance that are steady in order to make governance sensible. And I think that's the perspective I have behind democracy I'd like to see.
Just to bring this back to the founders, you're saying the founders did not get that part right.
I think the founders believed in a different kind of Republican governance that was less democratic. I think that they wanted to protect certainly property owners. I think they wanted to protect men like themselves. Obviously, you did not have free suffrage at the beginning of this country. Even for white men, it was propertied white men who had the ability to express themselves politically. So they believed in a fundamentally more restrictive and less open kind of Republican governance than the kind I'm talking about.
You're talking about how we need good rules. Another reason I really respect the founders is that they realized that constitutions are not enough, that civic values are necessary, that morals are necessary, that the idea of what makes a citizen is important. And I know they didn't always live up to these values, but they knew that they were important. And to a certain extent, with these culture wars and discussions about woke and so on, and the anger that's out there, we need that first. I think we need to build that first before we can even think about changing the Constitution. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think it's practical. I think it's more important, and I'm very glad and I'm very happy with these sort of civic centers that are popping up around the country in various, and I've been to quite a few of them, and I think that's very good. They are discussing, they are debating the Constitution, they are debating what it takes to be a citizen, and I think this is so important. If we keep denigrating the founders and the Constitution, it creates cynicism, I think. People are less likely to participate in politics, and that's very sad. You know, you mentioned Jefferson. And didn't he say something, you're more of an expert, I think, than I, didn't he say something where somebody asked him, what kind of government are we? And he said, we're a republic if we can keep it?
It's Franklin. It was Elizabeth Willing Powell asking after the convention, I think, breaks off in Philadelphia. And this is apocryphal. This almost certainly did not happen. But the story is
okay.
this woman,
Another
Elizabeth
beautiful
Willing Powell,
story.
Yes, Another beautiful story. But, you know, she asked Franklin, walking out of the convention hall, what kind of government we have. And he says a republic if we can keep it.
Now we're going to bring in some other voices, people who have been following the debate so far. And who know this topic, have been thinking and writing about this topic, and they're going to each be welcomed to ask a question to our debaters. So first, I want to say hello to Manisha Sinha. Manisha is the Draper Chair in American History at the University of Connecticut. Most recent book is called The Rise and Fall of the Second American Republic, Reconstruction, 1860 to 1920. Manisha, welcome. Thanks for joining us very much. And what questions do you have for our debaters today?
Thank you so much, John, for having me. And I really have enjoyed listening to both Osita and Helena put forward their positions. And I have a quick question, two-part question. The first is to both of you, and that is, can we look at the founders as an undifferentiated lot?
Let me take that to them first so that we can remember that. Have to remember your second question. Were they all the same person? Were they just a lump of the same people doing the same thing? Or do they deserve distinct reputations and respect and honor at this point in history? Why don't you take that first, Osita?
The founders had a lot of different ideas, a lot of clashes. I think that the account Madison writes, his notes on the convention, is a great look at some of the debates around the Constitution in particular that they had to have in order to draft that document. So no, the founders were not an undifferentiated lot. They disagreed about certain fundamental things, and there are things we can learn from those disagreements to this day. At the same time, I think that as undifferentiated, or as differentiated rather, and diverse as they were, as a class of people, I do think it does make sense to have a kind of critical attitude towards them. They're founders that are more and less sympathetic to progressive eyes. I think, ironically, for as much as people judge his personal conduct, I think harshly for good reasons. Jefferson, I think, is closest to the progressive mindset in a lot of different questions, especially the Constitution. But no, you're right that the founders were not all one class of people with the same cast of mind that we can look to with a kind of unified intention.
Helena?
Right, I agree. They're not. They are an undifferent. They are very different. They're very different, quite different. But I think that's another reason we can admire them, because they debated. They debated and they made compromises. And that's why maybe the Constitution also has serious flaws, particularly how it accommodated slavery. But they did debate and they got something done, which is more than we can say about today's politicians and legislators.
And Manisha, your second question?
Yes, and I would just add to that maybe we have a broader cast of founders, especially enslaved people who sued and petitioned for their freedom and ended up enacting abolition in many of the northern states. My second part had to do with the Constitution, because you both talked a lot about the Constitution as the founding document and whether we should keep it or amend it or change it. And my question to both of you is this. The second founding that Osita referred to, what I call the Second American Republic, the First American Republic actually fell, and there was a long, drawn-out civil war, which led to a new constitution virtually. But if you look at the 14th Amendment that, naturalized what we now call the Bill of Rights. It was called Bill of Rights by the person who actually wrote the 14th Amendment. My question to both of you then is, are we looking at a completely new constitutional order, Or are we really thinking about refounding the republic at different periods through constitutional amendments and federal law, as has been done in the United States? This mythic thing that we've had, one linear constitution, is not actually accurate. So what would you recommend today in constitutional change?
I'll let you go first, Helena, because I'm not sure that you're actually calling for a significant overhaul or radical overhaul. But I'll let you go first to tell us whether you are or not.
No, I'm not. I think we can work within the Constitution and make amendments where necessary. I know it's difficult, but it's surely even more difficult to overhaul it completely.
So my brief answer is that I don't really know. I mean, I'm arguing for opening the door to constitutional changes. I think that might take the form of amendments, although I think the process is very hard. I think there are things we can do in ordinary legislation. But I do think having this horizon that 100 years from now, 150, we might have a different document, it's not something that scares me. I think that we should be closed to. It's a matter of asking ourselves what institution would best serve our needs and moving in that direction.
Thank you very much. Manisha, thank you so much for joining us and for your question. I now want to bring in Michael McConnell. Michael is a professor and faculty director of the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law, also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Michael, thanks so much for listening in and for joining us now with your question for our debaters.
Thank you. What I always want to ask is compared to what? So we're supposed to stop idolizing the founders, but compared to what? And particularly for Osita, you're certainly right that we now have better science, better political science, lots more experience. But I wonder whether we actually have better leaders than back then. Is there, in terms of people of courage and farsightedness and public spiritedness, would there be a single statesman, American statesman in the 21st century who you think stacks up to the likes of Madison, Jefferson, Washington, Hamilton?
No, I think the 21st century is kind of a fallow field for liberal leadership. Fortunately, though, we've had 250 years of history we can look to. I do think, as I said at the outset, that there have been leaders who followed the founders, who did tremendous, extraordinary things for the country, both as conventional politicians and also people outside of formal politics. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't consider people like Martin Luther King part of this pantheon, if we must have one. People who really pulled this country in a fundamentally different direction and improved it. So, no, the 21st century is pretty bleak ground. But that's a call for us to stand up and expect more of our leaders, not to extol or over-idolize the people in the first founding generation.
Helena, I suspect the question resonates with you.
Yeah, the
premise of the question.
The premise of the question does resonate with me, precisely because we don't have the leaders that would anything comparing to these men who, again, I don't idolize, but I think are marvelous examples and did something really beautiful for the country. I don't want to take too much time, but I can talk again about France, where Madame de Staël, I'm writing a book about this fabulous woman. She lamented during the Revolution that they didn't have good men like we had in America, and because of that, because of the need for people also, as I said earlier, the need for people to have good leaders, to have good examples, they got Napoleon. They got demagogues. This was the result of more direct democracy.
Thank you very much for that answer, Helena. And thank you very much for your question, Michael. I now want to bring in John Malcolm. John is Vice President for the Meese Institute for the Rule of Law at Advancing American Freedom. John, thanks for joining us and for listening in. And what question do you have for our debaters?
Sure. So I certainly agree that the founders were not perfect. As James Madison said in Federalist number 51, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Nonetheless, the founders drafted our Constitution, which is the oldest written Constitution that's still active today. The founders also established a government based on the consent of the government, founded on the concept that all men are created equal and have certain God-given inalienable rights, which was unthinkable in a world that was governed by military rulers and hereditary monarchs. So my question, Osita, is the following. Would you concede that the principles underlying our government and the system of checks and balances that the founders set up, with the ability to amend the Constitution in a way that requires substantial support but not unanimity of the entire country, that this was very admirable and worth studying and celebrating?
And preserving, by the way, is that part of your question? Okay.
Well, I think worth studying for sure. Celebrating, I think, again, I go into this in more detail than I possibly could here in the book about what I think the flaws of the Constitution are. But what I will say here is that, as admirable as it might have been in 1787 to create, as I said, this truly new form of government to empower people, I think more than was the case under British rule, the age of the document since then is not something that intrinsically recommends it. I don't think that somebody saying, well, I have the oldest car on this block still in operation is necessarily a good recommendation of that mode of transport. We have to have a critical reading of the document and understand whether it serves our interests and our purposes today. That's what I'm arguing for. So certainly the Constitution is worth studying, and I wouldn't even say that there's nothing admirable about it as a document that is crafted at the end of the 18th century. But we've had a lot of experience since then. We have new problems, we have new concerns, we have new interests, and I think we should be open to reconsidering our constitutional arrangements on that basis.
I would just say that the language that I mentioned in my opening sentence, we the people, and the idea of natural rights and equality, even though it refers to men, and it was white men and no women, these people have used these principles. Women argued for their rights on the basis of the Constitution. Slaves did as well. These words have resonance. They're beautiful. And I think it's dangerous to really, in the situation I think I've said, I mean, dangerous is a serious word, but I really believe that at this moment particularly, we need to defend the Constitution. We need civic education. We need people to learn the Constitution and to understand what it says and admire and show gratitude to the Founding Fathers.
John, do you have a follow-up question based on the answers you heard?
Well, look, I certainly think that we should be amenable to amending the Constitution. We've done it 27 times before, but it is a founding charter. Under the Articles of Confederation, it was unanimous. And here, you require a broad support across the country, which is what it should mean when you're going to amend our founding charter. And I guess I would ask Osita whether he thinks that other countries where they amend the Constitution in the same way that they might change a dinner order by looking at a menu is a preferable system.
Well, certainly I don't agree with Jefferson that 19 years is appropriate. I think that the right amount of time for a constitution's lifespan is probably between 19 and 239. I think that something in that range seems a little bit more appropriate. I mean, I think the University of Chicago did a study maybe a decade ago where they found that in the developed world, the average lifespan of the Constitution is something like 30 years. And yes, there are revolutions and reasons why that might be the case in certain cases, but you also see examples like Sweden, for instance, where they just decided that enough time had passed in peacetime to fundamentally think about their institutions, whether they were still working, and to come up with a different document. That does happen too. And again, all these problems that Helena mentions, which I think are real problems, the divisions in American society, demagoguery, the absence of the rule of law, there are ways in which, again, in ways that I explore more deeply in the book and in my other writing, I think the Constitution has actually exacerbated these things, especially when it comes to the power that the president now wields. People warned back when the Constitution was being ratified that we created an executive that was going to be overly powerful, and the Constitution did not provide sufficient checks for this. I think we're seeing examples of that every single day now. So there are things that I think are wrong with our politics that are not just matters of ignoring the Constitution. I think the Constitution exacerbated some of our political woes, and it's time for us to take that seriously.
John, thank you very much for your question and for joining us. And Helena, in fairness, I want to give you a chance to respond to Osita if you would like to, but I have another question I'd like to bring to you if you don't want to respond to that.
No, that's okay. I thought it was kind of fun that Osita spoke about Sweden, because as you know, I'm Swedish. And I don't know if we can compare the United States to a small country of 8 million people. I think they're 10 million now, very, very similar in culture, although that's changing now. But anyway, it's a very different kind of project to change the American Constitution and change the Swedish one.
We're going to go to our closing round in just a moment. But before we do, a question that has occurred to me as we've been listening to this conversation, prompted by, Helena, you're talking about the impact of the current discourse on college students. I remember growing up a long time ago, going to school, and we were very, very much given what I think Osita would call almost the religion, civic religion of the founders. Pictures of George Washington. It was always George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Those were the two national birthdays that we celebrated. And we were very, very much told the story that these were men of extreme nobility who were special, who did belong on a pedestal, who did deserve their own days, and that there was nobody like them. Do you feel that, and getting that in childhood was really is a very powerful imprint. I'd like to ask each of you whether you think there should be changes to the way smaller children are taught, where that imprint first happens in the culture, because it is so important. I'll have you go first with that, Osita.
Well, I mean, I think it's hard. I think it's hard to talk to small children about matters of politics and history in general. Especially when it comes to things like the reality of slavery. On the one hand, obviously, I wish that people knew more about our history there and the darkness and evil that was involved there. How do you talk to somebody who's 8 years old about that? There's, I think, a real difficulty there. And I think it's true that we need to teach people about our history, where this country came from. So I don't really know. I mean, I think that's a question that's best, suited to people who have the, I think, very difficult task of trying to impart civics to very young people today. But what I'll say, though, is that, when it comes to the attitudes we have as adults about these people, the actual culture we have is very concerning. As you said at the very beginning, we have a president who attacks historians and attacks museums if they offer any kind of critical attitude towards the founders. We have people who are regarded as suspicious if they have anything but a reverential attitude in their public writing about people like Jefferson. And I think that that's an unhealthy culture. So whatever happens at the level of young people, certainly when it comes to people who are adults and should be having adult conversations and frank conversations about where this country came from, I don't think we have a culture that takes criticism very well. And I hope that changes.
Well, you kind of wandered a little bit off the what did we teach kids question a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
Because no, that's okay. I think your answer is you're not sure, which is perfectly reasonable. But I want to take the same question to you, Helena, again, to get out of the college age student, because I really think these things begin really early.
It's very funny because I had some closing remarks that refer to that. But I would answer your question. Yes, I think we can say that they're exceptional people, to 6-year-olds, to first graders, to second graders, to third graders. I think we should add other heroes from American history. We should add Martin Luther King. We should add, but not demote, those brilliant and admirable men.
Because I might have stumbled into your closing remarks, I don't want to drain that moment for you. So why don't we move to our closing remarks then and call it a wrap on the discussion portion. So we're going to move to our closing round, and it's where the debaters have one more time, very briefly, to make their case for why they are taking the side they are. Osita, you're up first. One more time, why you believe that we should stop idolizing the founding fathers. The floor is yours.
So thanks again for having me. So I was actually in DC on the 4th of July. I was there to write a little bit about the commemorative events, all the song and dance that was going on. And I decided to take a moment to actually go to the National Archives. For as much as I'd spent time in DC, lived in DC, I'd never actually gone into that place to see the Constitution, to see the Declaration. It was about 102 degrees outside. I was there for 2 hours with people who were eager to see them. And once you got into this space, the first thing you notice is the historian Pauline Maier has written in her wonderful book, American Scripture, is that this place is kind of like a shrine. It's kind of like a chapel, something you would see in a kind of religious building. And there are these throngs of people who are there in front of these documents, crowding around them to the point where you can't actually see them. People are doing selfies, people are trying to take pictures with their children. It's this kind of mob scene. And in it all, you can't actually see the documents at hand very closely until you push and shove your way towards them. If you do in the Declaration's case, the document is basically flayed to the point of illegibility, even when you get up there. One of the things I noticed is that out in the corner of this rotunda, they have the 19th Amendment, which was totally unseen by most people, not of any interest, the engrossed copy that they had in Congress. And, as a journalist, you look for visual metaphors to try to make the argument that you're trying to make. But, this was almost a perfect example, to the point, like, we worship them to the point that we obscure what they actually did. We obscure the history that followed them. And, for me, I think the most interesting thing in that room was not the documents themselves, but seeing the American people in their diversity, in their differences, from all corners of the planet, coming together to respect history, sure, but I thought that crowd was more interesting than the documents that they were there to see. It was a vision of a country the counters couldn't have imagined, a beautiful country, and one that I think it's still a privilege to be a part of. And I'd like us to take more of an interest in ourselves and our possibilities.
Thank you very much, Osita. And Helena, you get the last word with your closing, please.
Okay, wonderful. So I also have a personal story, and that's again in my school in Beirut, Lebanon, the American Community School, where every morning we were asked to. There was a flag in the classroom, and we were asked to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And I thought, as a Swedish citizen, I thought that was beautiful. It was a beautiful moment. We are pledging allegiance to a flag. That represents an idea and a constitution. It's not a person. It's not a king. It's an idea. And it's something that binds us together. Osita just talked about also people coming together to look at the Constitution. Now that's beautiful. We need moments like this more than ever today to bring us together.
Thank you very much. Sounds like I didn't steal your thunder. So very much appreciate your closing. And I appreciate both of you as we wrap up the debate. I want to thank Osita and Helena. We really appreciate that you were willing to have this conversation, that you approached it the way you did, that you argued civilly. Of course, there's a lot of common ground, but there was some meaningful disagreement, and you talked it through in a way that let us all learn from the points you're making. So thank you very, very much for taking part in the program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'd also like to thank the other voices that joined the conversation, Manisha Sinha and Michael McConnell and John Malcolm. Thank you very much for bringing in interesting questions and moving the conversation in an even more interesting direction. And finally, a big thank you to you, our audience, for tuning in to this episode of Open to Debate. We're a nonprofit working to combat extreme polarization through what you just saw, which was civil debate. And our work is made possible because of you, by listeners like you, and by the Rosencrantz Foundation and by supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our chairman. Our CEO is Leah Mathau. Andrew Lipson is head of production. Michelle Debrasini is head of marketing. This episode was produced by Julia Sirkin. Alexis Pangrazi is our executive producer. The Open to Debate team also includes Katy Perry, Gabriella Mayer, Gabrielle Iannicelli, Linda Lee, and Scott Jacoby. Damon Whittemore mixed this episode. Our theme music is by Alex Clement, and I'm John Donvan. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.